So, Rob, you've got your business idea, you've got your logo, you've got your brand, you've got your enthusiasm. How do you go about starting the structure for your business?
Well, it depends on what sort of business you want to create, what your plans are, your aspirations, whether you're working on your own, whether you're working with others. Are you going to be a sole trader? Are you going to be a partnership? Are you going to be a limited company?
So you've got all of these different structures out there, Rob. And let's be honest, there's 5.5 million micro businesses in the UK. That's a serious amount of people. We've got all sorts. So your sole trader, your partnerships, your limited companies. What are the risks around those?
Well, a sole trader is personally liable for everything that they do.
So potentially, Rob, if they're personally liable, that means that they could get in some serious trouble themselves. Is that right?
Yeah, but I think it's important not to be a scaremonger around things like that. You know, there are millions of sole traders that have operated in the past and that are still operating in the UK today.
And what sort of businesses would be a sole trader?
Well, I think, you know, someone who perhaps is setting up a crafting business, perhaps. You know, they're working from home, they are putting together crafting packs for people to buy. Maybe they're selling them into the crafting community. Got a simple website. It's a sort of business where there's perhaps very little liability that they're going to incur. They've got no employees. They're not buying in, not taking on significant supply contracts. They're not borrowing money. You know, it's these areas
a regular
where
business where they have a hobby which may have scaled in some
exactly. Exactly. And I think that can also extend to, of course, in partnership, the partners have personal liability. There are things called limited liability partnerships. We don't see a huge number of those, but they're perhaps more suited to professional partnerships and things like that. But again, so partnerships, sole traders, the proprietors of the business have that personal liability. And I think we tend to look at limited liability in small limited companies where the business is going to take on employees. It's perhaps operating in a field where there is more potential liability in relation to the contracts that it undertakes, and perhaps taking on liability with borrowing and trade suppliers and things like that.
So from your experience, Rob, are there issues in partnerships? Do they create their own sort of concerns? Would you have a memorandum of understanding and some of these big legal terms between the two?
Well, yes, is the answer to that. I think, we regularly get calls from people who are in partnerships or in limited companies where the relationship between the business owners has become strained. I mean, that's perhaps the nicest way of putting it. Sometimes it's beginning to go that way. Sometimes it's gone horribly wrong. One of the things that I think people don't always get is that where you've got two or three people who are working, or more people who are working together in a business with a view to making a profit, they've created a partnership. And if you don't set out the arrangement in a partnership agreement, then there's a statute that covers what the terms of what the basic arrangements will be around the operation and breakdown of that partnership. And that's not a very good way of dealing with things. Ideally, every partnership should have a partnership agreement. And the same sort of situation arises between the shareholders in a limited company, where they need a shareholders agreement. The shareholders agreement, partnership agreement, they sort of do the same job for partnerships and limited companies.
So in terms of the process of going through it, sole trader, what sort of paperwork do they need?
For a sole trader?
Yeah, for a sole trader.
Sole traders don't need much paperwork at all.
Okay,
I mean,
so if your paperwork divergent, you don't want to go near it, would that be a good solution for someone there?
Well, I mean, if you're the only person operating the business, you can be a sole trader. Yeah, it's fine. I mean, there you've got to register your business for tax purposes. You've got to you might want things like terms and conditions of business for your interaction with your customers. You might need to consider the contracts that you have with your suppliers. You might have a tenancy agreement of an office space or a working space. So there's always some paperwork potentially around a business, but a lot of the most successful entrepreneurs that I've worked with over the years are not interested in the paperwork.
I totally
the paperwork
get that.
very often is a bit of a muddle, or it follows along behind the activity.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's often many occasions where people have suddenly gone, I need to get my finances together, and they come with a paper bag of receipts, and it's not necessarily there, but the company is doing well. So sometimes we just need to look at the legalities around, do you have a separate bank account for those sorts of things? Who could come looking and asking questions if you needed to do certain things within your business, which often gets forgotten in the excitement of actually running the business itself. So sometimes for me, I'm always saying, let's be cautious, let's have your separate bank account. Let's make sure that everything can be allocated outside of your own personal finances, just because it becomes clearer and a lot more engaging for you as a business to understand how your profitability is working, whether or not actually you're not just working really, really hard without achieving a great deal. So that's really interesting. On a partnership, the same sort of things, same paperwork, slightly different. How do we need to go through that to be legitimate?
It's very similar. I mean, as I said, you don't need a partnership agreement to be a partnership. You are a partnership as a matter of fact if there are two or more of you working together in a business. But when things go wrong, not having a partnership can make life a lot more difficult to find a way through it. I've seen a lot over the years of people who spend an awful lot of time getting everything, all their ducks in a row.
Perfectly beautiful.
Spending an awful lot of time over the design of their logo and their stationery and their, the way everything looks, and making sure that doing loads and loads and loads of groundwork, but not actually getting on and doing any business.
Totally understand that, Rob.
And you can the sort of complete opposite end of the spectrum, where there are people who dive in, do lots of stuff, and get themselves into a horrible muddle. And I think there's a happy medium to be struck, and having a quick call with your accountant. I mean, you're talking about finances, and people chucking all their receipts in a carrier bag and going along and dumping them on a bookkeeper's or an accountant's desk. I'm sure that all accountants, if somebody phones them up and says, "Look, I'm starting a business. Give me the 10 top tips for me. What do you need from me? When do you need it? How can I save myself a lot of stress and heartache, and probably above all anything else, money, by delivering you what you need when you need it most efficiently, so you can spend your time quickly and efficiently, do my books for me, get my VAT return in, do my accounts." And it's exactly the same with solicitors. I think and legal advice. I think the problem often stems from that horrible perception that lawyers horrible, expensive.
It's going to cost me money, Rob.
They're going to be really expensive, and they're going to talk a load of mumbo jumbo that I don't understand. And we are so happy to have a chat with somebody beforehand, to give them some tips, to give them some guidance. And, very often that call, it's not a case of opening a file and starting the clock ticking. It's someone who needs a bit of help, interesting. We that's what we like. We like to build relationships with people. And, I've done this for a very long time now, Alex. And there are people I worked with 30, 40 years ago who were at the very beginning of their business process, who've gone all the way through to, some of them have retired long ago, setting businesses up, selling businesses, buying other businesses. We like to be there for the journey. That's the interesting bit about the job, really.
And I think that's fantastic, Rob. I mean, you often find that certain small businesses see things as transactional, so it's a very one-dimensional piece. Actually being with them as that guided source of knowledge, being almost like that friend they can ring just to give you that little bit of guidance, that is second to none when running a business. You need to be able to have that confidence that you can pick the phone up and ask a question. And for me, that's absolutely fantastic. And where you mention we're there for the journey, that is not always the case with many organisations, especially when they're offering business services. So that's superb.
I think the thing is that very often the question or the answer to the question might be a very quick steer. The right person to speak to, a quick guide on the best procedure to follow, the key things that somebody needs to think about before they take the next step. Sometimes it will be, well, ideally, we could give you a bit of help with this. You might need an hour or two's work, and there might be some cost associated with it. But actually, a bit of more of an understanding about what value there is in having some of that advice. Whether that's going to help them get to a better outcome faster, more confidently, and perhaps save an awful lot in the sense that if they don't get it right, something could go horribly wrong, and that could be very expensive.
100%, Rob. The initial cost shouldn't negate the bigger issues which could come from not doing things correctly.
No, and again, you don't want to be a prophet of doom about stuff, but the situations we get where business owners, I mean, sometimes it's a situation where people have set up a business. Sometimes it's a family situation where family members have ended up being in business together because they've joined the parents' business or they've inherited something. And there is things do fall apart, and there is no shareholders agreement or there's no partnership agreement. The cost, and it's not just the financial cost, it's the cost in time, just the time the time out of your life spent dealing with it. And it's the sort of emotional, mental cost of dealing with dispute, contention, that I'm not saying that a shareholders agreement or a partnership agreement is a panacea, that having those in place means that you never have any.
It gives you a baseline.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the really crucial thing about them, or the real value in them, is that going through the process of creating them, if you take a little bit of time, a little bit of care in going through them and talking the issues through, you've got fairly standard provisions in all, or they can be very complex, but let's start with something simple, basic, covers the key issues. And the point is that when the people involved sit down and we perhaps go through those things together and say, okay, so who's putting what money in? How is that money being provided? What about additional funding? What happens if someone wants to leave? What happens if somebody isn't pulling their weight? What happens if somebody dies? What happens if there are other problems, or you want to sell the business, or one of you wants to sell and the other one doesn't? And just talking those things through gives everybody the opportunity in the early stage, before they've really sort of gone so far down the track it's too late, to think it through and talk about it. And come up with, often think about things that you hadn't really, I hadn't thought about that. And it flags it up. Everybody's thrashed it out and come up with, as you say, a baseline, a sort of this is what we think will happen.
Our initial beliefs.
In those situations. So very often when those problems arise, or if something really crops up that is a problem when the time comes, that original agreement isn't necessarily the way that it's all resolved, but it is then becomes a starting point that you've then got to factor in. Well, where are we now? Who's got what money? What do we want to do? What are the drivers in this? But there is something that says if we can't fundamentally agree, this is what we agreed in the first place. So this is our guide.
So just taking on that, Robert, for good practice, do you think this should be reviewed on an ongoing basis? So every year, every 2 years, just to sort of understand. How do you see that?
I don't think that in reality that businesses, I've been a business owner myself for many, many years. We're all too busy to think to review everything like that. But what tends to happen is that these things get readdressed when changes happen.
Sure.
So if for example a business wants to scale up and it needs to bring in funding, it might be bringing that funding in by way of loan or by way of investors, people in becoming equity participants in the business, and that's a time when everyone sits down and readdresses where they are and where they want things to go, and it's changes in the individual's lives, people wanting to re-engineer their work-life balance, their involvement in the business. I think it's at key stages that we tend to review the structures.
Okay, excellent, Rob. So we've got sole traders, we've got partnerships, we've got limited companies. What route would you do if you were starting up a business, Rob?
Well, it would absolutely depend on the sort of business I was running with. The advantage to being a sole trader, or one of the advantages of being a sole trader and keeping things really simple, is there's less paperwork involved. There's less expense in organising, a more refined structure. There's more flexibility with it. And if you, as I said before, if you haven't got lots of liabilities, you don't need to be a limited company. And also bear in mind that even when sometimes it seems right to set up as a limited company, that idea of being a limited entity, the whole point around that is you're limiting your liability. Mm-hmm. So you set up as a company with 10 £1 shares, and the founders put in £5 each, and they've got their 10 shares, and their liability supposedly is limited to that £5.
Sure.
But in practice, if you're going to the bank and wanting to borrow some money, the bank isn't going to lend you £5,000, £10,000, $50,000, £100,000, whatever, and accept that your liability is limited to your £10 worth of shares. The bank's going to say, well, we'd like a personal guarantee from you, please, Alex. Yeah. So, and personal guarantees and they're for when you take on your photocopier contract, or you lease your vehicles or your mobile phones. There are all sorts of ways where that limited liability gets eroded. So again, you've got to look at the detail all the time. But yeah, it really comes down to a quick conversation with accountants, maybe solicitors. I mean, there's loads of information online about this, and there's all the MENTA publications on starting businesses, which have got lots of useful information about it. So yeah, it's horses for courses.
That's superb, Rob. That's a really, really good discussion. And we often find that many businesses are unsure as to how they progress. It's really interesting to also understand around the sole traders partnerships and the limited company options and how that can move forward. From my perspective, it is 100%, as you said. Look at what you're trying to achieve. Look at how that positions itself. And then look at where, if you are in a partnership, others want to be at particular points in time. But that's been absolutely fantastic, Rob. Thanks for your insights. Thanks for your information. And yeah, can't wait for the next podcast.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Me too.
Thanks for listening, everybody. And just remember, this is purely discussion. It's not direct advice. And should you have any bespoke needs that you have for your business, please seek legal, financial, or other business advice and support where you need it.